She made it home safely that night, but just hours later she walked out again. No Uber, no calls, no noise. And by morning, she was found 30 miles away, shot nearly 10 times. The terrifying part, she didn't go with a stranger. She went with someone she trusted.
This camera right here that captured the video police just released. We know from her roommate that she gets home around midnight, but then winds up 30 miles away.
The night at Oxford, Mississippi started like any other. For 21-year-old Ally Kostial, it was just another evening. She had finished a test earlier that day, taken a nap, and later called her mother. The conversation was ordinary, the kind of call no one ever imagines will be the last normal moment. She told her mom she was heading out with friends. Hours later, just before midnight, Ally walked out of a bar in the town square. Surveillance cameras captured her movements. Casual, unbothered, completely unaware of what was coming. Within minutes, she got into an Uber. The ride was uneventful. The driver later confirmed everything seemed normal. She was dropped off safely at her apartment, just like countless nights before. Her roommate saw her come home. Everything at that point made sense. But sometime after midnight, Ally left again. No one heard her go. There was no second Uber request, no notification, no digital trace of a ride being called. And yet, by the next morning, she would be found 30 miles away, in a place no one ends up by accident. At around 10:30 a.m., a deputy on routine patrol drove through an isolated area near Sardis Lake, Buford's Ridge. It was the kind of place people rarely visited. Long, empty roads, thick trees pressing in from both sides. No houses, no lights, just silence. And then, something broke that silence. Her body was lying near an abandoned fishing camp. She had been shot nearly 10 times. Shell casings scattered the ground. Her purse, her ID, left nearby. It didn't look like robbery. It didn't look random. It looked intentional, the kind of violence that sends a message even when no words are spoken. Investigators at the scene, people who had worked countless cases, were shaken. One officer later admitted he had never seen anything like it. The number of gunshots alone told them this wasn't panic. It wasn't impulsive. It was personal. And that's when the most chilling realization began to take shape. Ally didn't get there alone. She couldn't have. There was no ride request, no sign of force at her apartment, no indication she had been abducted. Which meant only one thing. She had gotten into a car willingly, with someone she trusted. That single fact shifted the entire investigation. Because now, they weren't just looking for a killer. They were looking for someone close. Security footage became the first thread to pull. Cameras around the square showed her movements that night, every step, every transition, every moment leading up to her return home. But after that, nothing. A gap. A missing piece of time where everything changed. Investigators turned to her apartment. Inside, something stood out immediately. Her phone was gone. Whoever she left with had made sure to take it, but they missed something. Her Apple Watch, still sitting there, quietly holding fragments of her last conversations. Messages synced, conversations preserved. And within those messages, investigators found the beginning of something far more disturbing than anyone expected. A story that hadn't been visible to her friends. A relationship, and a name that kept coming up again and again. Brandon Theesfeld. At first, it didn't sound unusual. College relationships are messy. On and off connections, emotional ups and downs. It wasn't uncommon. But the more investigators looked, the more they realized this wasn't just complicated, it was toxic. Friends described a pattern. He would pull her in, then push her away. Charm followed by cruelty. Attention followed by silence. Emotional highs, followed by devastating lows. It was the kind of cycle that traps people, makes them hold on to the good moments while ignoring everything else. But there was more. The messages revealed something Ally had been dealing with privately. She believed she might be pregnant, and she had been trying, desperately, to meet with Brandon in person to talk about it. Her texts were emotional, at times frantic. She wanted clarity, a plan, something real. His responses told a very different story. Cold, dismissive, final. If it is pregnant, we aren't keeping it. That alone was disturbing. But what came next was worse, because almost immediately after that conversation, Brandon began searching online. Not for reassurance, not for support, but for control. Abortion pills, legal options where the father didn't want the child. Phrases like, mother wants kid, father does not. It wasn't panic, it was strategy. And then the searches escalated. Silencers, weapons, how serial killers gain trust, how victims were lured into cars, how to restrain someone. These weren't random curiosities. They were deliberate, calculated. Step by step, a picture began forming. Not of someone reacting in the moment, but of someone planning ahead. And suddenly, the case took a darker turn. Police reached out to Brandon, asking him to come in for questioning. He agreed, calmly, said he'd be there Monday morning. He never showed up. Instead, his phone and bank activity showed him heading out of town, running. That was all investigators needed. A BOLO alert was issued. His vehicle was quickly spotted at a gas station. Within hours, he was in custody, and what they found only deepened the horror. Inside his truck, a .40 caliber handgun, the same caliber used in the murder. His clothes, carrying traces of evidence. And then, back at his apartment, something even more chilling. A handwritten letter, addressed to his parents. In it, he didn't deny anything. He didn't ask for help. He didn't even try to explain it away. Instead, he wrote words that felt like a confession long before he was ever caught. I am not a good person. Something in me just doesn't work. I've always had terrible thoughts. I know I'm going to get caught. Investigators reading that letter described it as one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence they had ever encountered. Not because of what it proved legally, but because of what it revealed psychologically. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't accidental. This had been building for months, maybe longer. The timeline was reconstructed with precision. That night, just before 1 a.m., Brandon left a gathering. No one saw him go. He got into his truck and drove to pick her up. She left her apartment quietly, got into his vehicle, believing they were finally going to talk. 45 minutes. That's how long they drove. 45 minutes into darkness. Away from the town, away from safety, into isolation. Cell phone data tracked every mile, every turn, every moment, until they reached that abandoned fishing camp. What happened next? No one witnessed, but the evidence told its own story. Multiple shots, different angles, movement around the scene. This wasn't one pull of the trigger. It was repeated, relentless. Even experienced investigators struggled to process it. The brutality, the isolation, the psychological buildup. It was overwhelming. Some officers later admitted they couldn't shake the images, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop replaying the scene in their minds. For some, it crossed a line. The kind of case that doesn't stay at work when your shift ends. The kind that follows you home. And in some instances, required therapy just to cope. Because this wasn't just violence, it was calculated destruction. In court, the evidence was undeniable. Cell phone records placed them together. The weapon matched. The letter spoke volumes. The search history painted a clear picture of intent. Still, Brandon claimed it wasn't planned, that it just happened, but nothing supported that version. Not the preparation, not the location, not the number of shots. Eventually, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison. And in that courtroom, for the first time, he showed emotion, apologized, said he wished he could take it back, but for everyone sitting there, those words meant nothing. Because some actions don't have explanations, and some damage can never be undone. For Ally's family and friends, the grief didn't fade, it changed. They remembered her for who she was, not what happened to her. Someone who loved deeply, who gave everything to the people around her, who saw beauty in simple things, like sunsets. So much so that she created an entire space just to save them. Now, those sunsets mean something different. They became a way to remember, a quiet ritual, a connection that couldn't be taken away. But the questions this case leaves behind are harder to ignore. How do you recognize danger when it wears a familiar face? How do you see manipulation when it's disguised as affection? And how do you stop something when it's already been quietly set in motion? Because in this case, the warning signs were there. The behavior, the words, the patterns. But like so many tragedies, they only became clear after it was too late. And that's what makes this story so unsettling. Not just what happened in that remote, silent place, but the fact that it didn't start there. It started long before. In conversations, in choices, in thoughts no one else could see. And by the time anyone realized, it was already over.